Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's RBC Canadian Open. Gonna break down what to expect from Hamilton Golf and Country Club, some of our key stats, comp courses that I'm using to identify those top plays, and then afterwards go through some of my exposure both for fantasy contest and for outright bets that I expect to go out there, have themselves a week that we can take for some value from both perspectives. So by the end, gonna have a good idea of how to model for this golf tournament and some potential options that you might want to keep an eye on for some of your exposure. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the golf course, which is Hamilton Golf and Country Club. This week, we've got ourselves a short par 70, but a lot different than what we had at Colonial Country Club last week. Last week, it was a lot of layups. You couldn't really differentiate yourself, at least easily, when it came to your driving. But this week, a lot more driver holes, a few more holes where you can really bite off some yardage with that length. So when you have a player like Rory that last won here in 2019, I think there's an obvious distance advantage there. But if you do look at the leaderboard from back there in 2019, a lot of your shorter players were up there in the top 2 through top 10, right? And pretty much everyone outside of Rory was somebody that's not the longest off the tee. But with some of the changes here, they renovated the golf course in 2019, made it a little bit longer. Also, some really soft conditions expected, especially for the first few days. We're probably going to see this place play a little bit longer this time. So if you saw my course breakdown, you know that I'm looking at driving distance, some of the long irons a little bit more. And if you take a look at the approach profile, it's a lot from 100 yards to 200 yards. You don't have a ton of shorter holes. You have two borderline drivable par 4s where you'll probably have something from 100 yards and in. If you end up laying up on the par 5s, that'll be another short iron approach. But outside of that, almost all the par 4s, all the par 3s are in that 100 to 200 yard range. The par 3s obviously on the longer end, right, closer to 175 to 200, but almost every single par 4 is going to give you something from 175 to maybe 125. If you're a longer player, you're hitting drivers off the tee, right, you're going to have a little bit more of a wedge game out there in terms of your approach profile, whereas if you're laying up a little bit, staying in front of some of the fairway bunkers, you're probably going to be hitting closer to 175 to 200. So it kind of depends on your off the tee game, right, with which key proximity bucket is going to be one to hone in on. But with some of your bombers that I think can take advantage of the longer golf course, it's going to be the shorter irons, right? It's going to be from 150 and in, maybe even 100 yards to 125. That is going to be my key proximity bucket this week. So it's a little bit of a different par 70. I think a little bit more driver heavy than you'd expect to see. And though there's only the 2 par 5s on site, you do have some of those drivable par 4s, which gives you a tangible edge for hitting the ball a long way. So if we're taking a look at our off the tee stuff, I've got driving distance and carry distance as a few metrics that I'm looking at. Fairways gain, driving accuracy still matters, right? A short positional track like this, where you had so many of those shorter players in the top 10 back there in 2019, you know, these sort of metrics are going to matter as well. It's just that I don't think you should only be focusing on the accurate drivers, as you had Rory McIlroy, right, winning back there in 2019. You have the soft conditions this time around. That's going to make it a lot easier to hit driver and hold some of these fairways. I just think it's going to play a little bit different this time around, and you already saw the emphasis on driving distance with Rory McIlroy. Putting matters at the shorter tracks, right? You see that with some of your shorter players, right? Normally, there's some of the better putters too. So if you're going to look at anything, look at bent grass stats. That is the surface of the week. Around the green, I'm mixing in too. You've got some small, tricky greens. A lot of the changes and renovations made the around the green shots a little bit more tricky. They removed some bunkers, which, believe it or not, right, hitting off a fairway is harder than hitting out of bunkers on the PGA Tour. And on top of that, they also added some shaved off chipping hollows, which might be a little bit trickier than what they had in 2019, but I wouldn't expect that to change all that much. I'm looking at short par 70s. Birdie or better percentage is always really important when you're looking at fantasy points, right? Birdies equates to fantasy points out there in DFS, so you definitely want to be looking at birdie production. And then in terms of comp courses, we've got Colonial. So last week at the Charles Schwab, that short par 70, TPC Southwind to short par 70 in the FedEx Cup playoffs. You also have Sedgefield Country Club, home of Wyndham, you know, same kind of track. And then Wildlife Country Club, another short positional kind of golf course, same setup, right? Short par 70. That's a little bit earlier in the schedule. So that's the Sony Open. That is the first full event field that we have of the season. And that should give you an idea of a few comp courses that you can look at, and then the key stats that I'm going with. Just to kind of recap the key stats, it's a lot of those mid irons that we're looking at, and you just kind of got to cater it towards the player, right? If it's a shorter guy, more positional player, probably look at those mid to long irons more. And if you're a bomber, like a Rory McIlroy, for example, it's going to be a lot of the shorter clubs that we're hoping to check off those boxes. And off the tee, I think you can get it done with either category, but you either need to be elite in terms of your accuracy or a bomber off of the tee. If you're somebody that can't do it in either category, I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to go out there and want to play it this week. So the short game still matters. You can't completely ignore it, but the ball striking is where you're going to find more consistency when it comes to your projections, going out there and modeling for any given golf tournament. And also, I think where you're going to separate yourself and find yourself a winner. So especially important when it comes from the outright perspective. But when we get down here to stats like birdie or better percentage, that's more so catered towards the fantasy side of things. So hope that gives you an idea of what I'm going with for this week. And now let's go ahead and dive into the plays. So first off, we're going to start up top with Rory McIlroy. So he's $12,100 in DFS, but the added benefit on a week like this is that pricing goes down to $5,000. So you're going to have some cheaper options that you can get to offset that price tag. And given that he's less than plus 400 to win this golf tournament, he's implied to win this a solid 20, even 25% of the time, depending on what site you're getting the odds on. But what I really like about Rory is the course history. I mean, one here, the last time they played at Hamilton Golf and Country Club, and he checks a lot of the boxes that we're looking for. Off the tee distance, there's no better player in the field with all the forced carries that can give you that huge advantage. Right? He's the one player who'll be able to take advantage of every single one of those. So he has that going for him. The mid irons have been a lot better here in 2024, especially of late. That's why he's had this recent resurgence. You've got the whole divorce narrative going for Rory McIlroy too. His bent grass numbers are good enough. He's one of the best players around the green. And at these short par 70s, which if you take a look at his event history, by the way, it's been played, this event that is, RBC Canadian Open has been played at different events. Of course, he won there in 2019, but at a similar track in 2020, so just after COVID, they played another short golf course up there, same type of agronomy, up there in Canada, and he won there too. And if you take a look at some of the comp courses, he doesn't play at these all that often, right? He skips a lot of these events, but like FedEx St. Jude, he's been pretty good at over the years, a bunch of top fives at that kind of event. He hardly ever has played Wyndham or Sony, but at other shorter tracks where it's not about the off the tee play, he has been surprisingly good, right? And he's just Rory McIlroy. He's a future Hall of Famer out there on the PGA Tour, so maybe we shouldn't be that surprised about that. But regardless of the venue, whether it's one that's like Quail Hollow that is perfectly built for Rory McIlroy's game, he tends to take advantage. And with the sneaky narrative, maybe it's not as sneaky anymore, right? After Rory McIlroy won at Hamilton, driving distance can be leveraged here, right? It's wide open off the tee. It's not a golf course with a bunch of trees right next to the fairways. So unlike the Charles Schwab Challenge where you maybe had 2 to 5 yards to work with, it's closer to 15 to 20 on all the driving corridors around this place. So if you end up missing just a little bit, right, you're still going to likely have a shot into the green, right? Unless you're missing off the planet, which Rory McIlroy has essentially eliminated from his game at this point. So I think off the tee, a lot of people are going to be looking for accuracy guys this week, which is a way to get it done around a short par 70. The other way to do it is to brutalize the place to death. I mean, go out there and just overpower it. And frankly, that's what he has the potential to do at this kind of golf course and what he did back there in 2019. So I don't think that's taken away, right? You don't have a lot of extra trees now, right? That are going to keep players from taking those kind of lines. If anything, the soft conditions, the rain that they've gone in this area is just going to make it even easier for him to go with that kind of strategy. It's worth noting that the outright number was not good enough for me. I did not take him at the plus 375 that I have access to on Hard Rock Bet, but I'm going to play him in probably about half of my DFS lineups this week. So it's going to depend on ownership. If he ends up coming in at like 40%, then maybe I have to rethink altogether whether I'm going to get exposure to Rory. But I'm expecting him to be about 30% owned. That is my early inkling when it comes to that ownership number, which of course is going to change wildly out here from Monday evening. But at the same time, if he's going to be 25-30%, if I take him in half my lineups, that's decent leverage to the field right there. And a player that I think at plus 375, you'd almost be a fool not to get over the field on, right? If he's going to be 25-30% owned. So I've shown it before at this golf course. He's kind of killed these shorter tracks over the last 3-4 seasons. And in general, right, he's number one in every modeling we can look at. He's my number one total model ranking, number one in terms of recent form, course fit, you name it, right, the longer term stuff. He's just clearly the best player in the field. So when you have that sort of spot, right, and he's not going to be 50% owned, or at least that's kind of what we're hoping for, at least out here on a Monday, then he's a spot I'll get over the field on. Now, if he is 50% owned, maybe we have to circle back on that, right, out there on the Wednesday live stream, which of course, guys, right, is Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll circle back on his ownership. We'll talk about how to approach it if it's getting way up there. But at 30%, which is where I've got him tentatively, definitely somebody I would get over the field on. So projects off the board, right? He's 94 points out there in my projections. And even guys like Cam Young, Sam Burns that I love this week, that maybe don't have as good a shots gained metrics, right, are down at 75 points. So that's all solid 20-point gap, right, compared to these two players, which just shows you the kind of upside, the kind of win equity that he has, that implied win equity that is just through the charts, right? And somebody that's less than plus 400 to win. Next up, we got our first outright bet. So Rory, right, going to be just a DFS play out there for me. Cam Young, though, at $9,800, I'll be playing a DFS and out there for an outright. So the number I got was far from the best that you can get. In fact, I still think there's 25, maybe even 28-1 numbers out there at a few smaller sports books. But I'll take him because I think he just has a good chance to win this event, right? And a lot of the things that we said about Rory, I mean, we didn't look at the stats on Rory, but we don't have to. I mean, we know what we're going to see, right? Guy is just scraping the ball, gaining in all four categories, mostly with the ball striking. And if we take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, it's even better, right? It's all four categories, and the ball striking is over a stroke and a half per round. In fact, close to 1.8 strokes per round, right? Gained in the ball striking. Somebody like Cam Young, it's been a little bit shakier lately, but if we zoom out a little bit, it gets a little bit better for Cam, right? He had a few close calls out there with near wins. And somebody that, if we're looking at driving distance, obviously that's checked with Cam Young. But the most intriguing thing to me, and if you saw my course breakdown, you already know what I'm going to say here, is that you would think that he'd be a really good long iron player, right? You'd be like, okay, Cam Young bombs the ball. He hits that high ball flight, probably really good from 175 and out. He's decent out there. I mean, he's not elite in any of those categories. You want to know where he is elite when it comes to the approach play? If you've been watching golf, if you've been following his rounds on ESPN Plus, I mean, you'd know this, but it's from the close stuff, right? It's with his wedges. This guy is deadly accurate from 125 and in. And it's partially the reason why he almost won the Valspar Championship, right? Another off-the-tee heavy golf course. I think this golf course sneakily is that, right? One that you can leverage with your off-the-tee distance. But if you're going to do that, you have to be able to score with the shorter clubs. And Rory, I actually kind of worry about that with a bit. He's been better lately, right? With the shorter stuff, with some of the in-between sort of yardages. Cam Young, I have no worries about. I mean, if anything, he is one of, if not the best player in the field when it comes to hitting shots from 150 yards and in. So I like that for Cam Young. He's going to be able to apply a ton of spin to the golf ball with a soft golf course. I think that plays directly into his skill set. So even though the last 12 measured rounds aren't that great, I think that's why you're probably getting a decent outright number and a decent price tag out here in DFS. I mean, he's cheaper than Lowry and Norn. I mean, that's crazy to me, right? Like in terms of talent level, that he is just much better than those other two. In fact, I have him up there with a Tommy Ladd, if not better than him. When it comes to the pure pedigree, you're getting a discount in both of those markets. And I think from the ownership angle, we'll get some attention this week, but I have a hard time thinking that he's going to be mega chalky out here at $9,800. So I think you could use him as a second man in. I also would be totally fine with starting lineups with the Cam Young because I think he has legit win equity in this sort of field. So another player that can take advantage of that power, and in general that I think really sets up well for this golf course. And kind of like Rory, if you take a look at the shorter tracks, you know, part of this is just that these guys are some of the better players on tour to begin with. So they should be playing well, regardless of golf course. And if you take a look at the shorter par 70s, he's also had a lot of success there. And I think a lot of that is because of his accuracy with clubs 150 yards and in. Next up, we got Sam Burns, who everything I just said about Cam Young can be exactly taken and said about Sam Burns. Sam Burns, long off the tee, has also torn up some of our comp courses. I think Valspar, even though I didn't list it as one of my top comps, would also be a pretty good track to use as a comparison here. But like Cam Young, it's uncanny. If you take a look at the shorter proximity buckets, Sam Burns is one of the top players in the field. Actually, I think he's top 5 in the field in almost every single one of those proximity buckets from 150 and in. So kind of like Cam Young, if he gets in his groove off the tee, if he's doing his thing in that category, right, gaining a bunch, right, with that, off the tee this week, at 25 to 1, I'll take him as he's going to take advantage of those looks, right? He's not the sort of player that I'm worried about setting up a bunch of wedges and then not hitting them close. Sam Burns, if anything, is better the closer you get him to the hole. So kind of like Cam Young, I think a lot of people would expect them to be better long iron players, and they're not bad. They're not poor long iron players. It's just that they're really separating from the field where you have them top 25 in any specific proximity buckets are in the shorter end of the spectrum. So again, we could look at the shots gained metrics. They're okay for both of these guys. It's not the reason why we're getting to a Sam Burns, right? He's gaining in 3 of the 4 categories, actually losing putting, which is a little bit surprising. Go to the last 24 rounds, it's pretty similar, right? He's slightly losing with the 2 short game categories. Off the tee approach is really what we're counting on with the Sam Burns, but you can see on bent grass, right? He gains about 1/3 of a stroke per round, so you'd expect a little bit of a bounce back now that he's on a favorable surface. And at 25 to 1, I know there's a 28 to 1 out there in a few books. I still took him at 25 to 1, right? Obviously, my hand is forced a little bit. I'm down here in Florida only with one sports book to use. But if you're in another state, you have more options to choose from. You could probably find a better number on both Cam Young and Sam Burns, if that's something that you're trying to tail yourself. So obviously, right, make your own bets, make your own decisions out there with your exposure. But these are the sort of players that I'm getting over the field on. And Rory, it's the course history, but with these 2 players, it's that elite combination of both off the tee distance and the wedge play that I think really separates them out there for Hamilton Golf and Country Club. Before we hop into our value plays, I'll remind you guys that for access to these spreadsheets, just go ahead and check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this video where on there you can go out there, download all of these for yourself, and of course, without all the censoring on it. So for all my projections, modeling, player pool bets for the entire field, make sure to go out there and check it out on there. On there, I'm posting updates throughout the week. So of course, the stuff here on Monday, right, doesn't have ownership, right? It's not a complete version of my player pool or betting card, but as the week goes on, I'll post different versions as perhaps my modeling changes, right, for some of the news coming from the golf course, as my player pool becomes more complete. Ownership, when we have that on Tuesdays, Wednesday, right, a lot of updates when it comes to my player pool. We'll have the weather waves on here. We'll account for that in all of our player pool and stuff. That's for main slate and for showdown in rounds 2 through 4. So for all that coverage, make sure to check out the Patreon. Again, there's a link in the description of the video to that. And for $15 a month is how you get access to these spreadsheets. The DFS tier will give you access to all the spreadsheets that you see here. I also have a prop tier where I'm posting all that exposure, which, by the way, has been unbelievable. We're up over 50 units this month alone when it comes to golf props. So if that's something that you're doing, make sure to check that out. I do a lot of DFS content here, not as much for props, but if anything, props have been the real moneymaker here in 2024. So we've got a tier for that if that's your thing. There's a combined golf tier for $25 where you get that plus all this DFS stuff on here. So of course, right, if you've been wondering how to get access to all of this research yourself, well, make sure to check out the Patreon. Of course, we've got the recent forum on there that I'm always going through over here on the other tabs. Event history, again, 2019's where they were at Hamilton Golf and Country Club. They've got the shots gained metrics over the last 24 rounds, 12 rounds, key stats plus my weighting. So you can see exactly how much I'm using each stat in my modeling to go out there and use for your own research. So again, that's in the description of the video to go out there and check out the Patreon. It helps financially support the channel. So of course, right, helps your boy out here, putting out even more content for all of you guys here on YouTube, but also gives you quick access to these spreadsheets and all the updates throughout the week. That's all I've got for the plug, right? I had to do that at one point in this video. I appreciate you guys for hanging in there with me. So moving on to our value plays. First off, we've got Akshay Bhatia. So $8,100, I took him at 50 to 1 to win this event. And somebody that I think is being completely slept on. I mean, he has multiple tour wins to this point, and he won the Valero Texas Open, which I know he didn't list it as a comp course, is eerily similar to what these players are going to face this week. And if we take a look at the shots gained metrics, there may be no better player in this range. In fact, I don't even think it's close when it comes to the ball striking, where you know, he's about a slight loser off the tee, which is actually kind of surprising. He's a Very consistent driver. He's above average length. He's very accurate off the tee. So something might be going on over his last few events, but the approach play is the best in the field, I think, right? I mean, I guess Corey Connors hasn't beat over the last 24 rounds, but outside of that, it's Akshay Bhatia there at number 2. The short game's gotten a lot more consistent. It's why he's gone out there and now been just a fixture on the PGA Tour almost every time he tees it up. And frankly, at this stage, why is he not $9,500? Why is he not up here with the Corey Connors, especially like he's better than McNeely is. That's for damn sure. And McNeely's $9,200 and we have Akshay at $81. In terms of misprices, it's the biggest on the slate in my opinion. And it's not just for DFS, it's for outrights too. How is he 50-1 to win this golf tournament when he has more wins than a vast majority of the field, right? There's like 2 guys that have as many, if not more wins, right? You got Rory, you've got Tom Kim, I guess, right, with his 2-3 wins over the last few years. Nick Taylor, I guess, right, he's got a few wins himself. Akshay Bhatia, and he's done it in less time than a lot of the other players, is just as good, if not better. And based on form, I mean, he's number 10 in my course fit rankings. He's even better than a lot of the other options, and he's got a worse betting number than all of these other guys. He's lower priced, and I'm not sure if he's going to be mega chalky this week. I'd have to imagine he is, right? If I'm so bullish on Akshay, I imagine there's got to be a lot of other people that are feeling the same way about it. But at the same time, if he's going to be 15% or lower owned, if not 10% or lower, I guess that's me really just being optimistic there, hoping that we get a lower ownership number, then I'm going to be way, way over the field. Regardless, I bet him at 50-1. I'm going to be looking at the top 10 market, potentially top 5 market out here over the next few days. But in general, I think a course that sets up really well, right? A lot of the Valero was about hitting fairways and then just hitting a lot of good mid to short irons. And that's kind of what you have with Akshay. Now he's going to be hitting more drivers, which I'm not worried about. Like I said, he's a pretty accurate driver and he hits the ball a good way as well. So I'm not worried about the off the tee play as much. Shots gained metrics are really the only worry there. But long term, a much better driver than what we've seen. I mean, the approach profile is perfect for this kind of golf course, and he's coming in off a win, right, just about a month and a half ago at this stage. So I like pretty much the trajectory of his career. I mean, that's pretty much, I don't know how you couldn't like it at this stage, right, with how much better he's getting month in, month out on the PGA Tour. But this golf course is, I think, one of the better setups for him on the entire tour schedule. So 50-1, $8,100, I think, is an absolute steal. Next up, we got Nicolai Højgaard, who I took at 75 to 1 to win this event. He's $7,400, and the form is not great. So that's why he's 75 to 1. It's why he's $7,400. But what I'll do with certain players is I'll just buy them due to pedigree. And the last 2 players are going to be like this, especially the last guy that we talk about is going to be somebody that you just got to kind of trust the long-term pedigree of. But Nicolai Højgaard wins internationally, right? He was one of the most consistent, one of the best players that we had on the DP World Tour, got into contention at the Masters. I mean, of all places, the hardest golf course in the world, right? It was one of his first few starts at the Masters, and he nearly wins the damn thing. And now he's 75 to 1 to win the RBC Canadian Open, right? I mean, he's super long off the tee. So if you're looking for that bomber narrative, he can do that. And then the wedges are surprisingly really good for Højgaard. He's somebody that was on the Ryder Cup team. And frankly, compared to the other guys around him, he is just way, way better of a player. In fact, I would have him as the same, if not a better type player as an Adam Hadman and Keith Mitchell, right? Aaron Rai, I think that's the kind of, talent level you could put him at. And if anything, I hate to pick on McNeely. I'm playing McNeely this week, by the way, just for the record. So it doesn't feel like I'm completely trashing him out here. I still think he's a pretty good play here. He's better than McNeely, though. In fact, I think he's got a better chance to win this event than somebody like Mav McNeely. And this guy's 75 to 1 to win the golf tournament. So to me, that is just blasphemous. It makes no sense that you'd put somebody with that kind of upside at 75 to 1. And in DFS, if he's $7,400 and I think he can win this golf tournament, of course I'm going to mix him into the player pool. So I don't think the ownership's going to be there because of the form or because of some of the recent events being really hairy stuff and dragging down a lot of his modeling numbers. I don't think that he'll be over 10%. In fact, I have him closer to like maybe 5, maybe 7% ownership here early on a Monday. So with that is a player that I'll get over the field on. So I'll be tracking the ownership. If he gets chalky for some reason, maybe I reconsider it. But the 75 to 1 for an outright, I just could not pass up that kind of number. So you're going to have to kind of put on the blinders a little bit, right? Don't look at the recent form rankings. Just to give you an idea, the last 24 rounds are not as bad as the last 12. But the last 24, you can see ball striking's been okay Short game's not there. The last 12 measured rounds is a kind of a tough scene to look at. The ball striking is still decent, but he's losing about a stroke and a half when it comes to the short game. So he's going to have to plug that. He's going to have to figure out a way to, at least be a neutral around the green. He's going to have to gain with the flat stick, of course, to go out there and win a golf tournament. But at the Masters, he had those bent grass greens. You can see for his career rate, he's a gainer on bent grass. If there's a spot where he's going to get good in that category, get right there, it's on bent grass, right? It's been his best surface so far on the PGA Tour. And then around the green, this golf course got easier after renovation. It was meant to make it more playable for the members at this golf course. Now that we have the soft conditions with all the rain coming through, it kind of feels like Hogard is going to get an easier setup, right? Especially around the green. He's going to hit more greens with how soft that they're going to be. Maybe the around the green doesn't trip him up as much. So we've got somebody who's still ball striking it decently. I mean, even over this rough stretch, right? I mean, he's been okay ball striking. Not great. He's been okay at least. The around the green might not matter as much. And then we get him on bent grass where he gains for his career, right? And at the Masters, just made a ton of putts on this same kind of bent grass. I don't know, just kind of feels like a get right spot for Nicolai Højgaard. So 75-1, I thought was just eye popping when it came to the outright number. But in DFS, if he's going to be sub 10% owned, it's a player that I'll get well over the field on. And now for our last play here, who is another one where if you just got to cross your fingers a little bit when you're playing this guy this week. It's not a high floor play. Let's put it that way. A really low floor, a lot of missed cut equity out here with Eric Cole. But I took him last week. I ended up being a failed experiment, did not go well. But if you played him last week and you tracked Eric Cole, it was a lot better than what we saw for the month before that. Month before that, there's a reason why. He's number 124 in my rankings this week. He was missing cuts week in, week out. A lot of golf courses that just really didn't fit Eric Cole's game. And last week, Charles Schwab, again, it's my number one comp course, right? So if anything, right, this last week performance is really going to matter. He missed the cut. So you may say like, oh, what the heck? Why would you want to play him? It's how he missed the cut. He missed the cut on the number. He gained in both ball striking categories and slightly lost with the short game, which if anything for Eric Cole, we're expecting the opposite, right? He's a very, very good short game player, one of the best around the green players that we have on tour, and a very consistent putter. And then on bent grass, you can see the surface of the week here, it gains close to half a stroke putting per round. So I'm not worried about that. Around the green, he is one of the most trusted players I have on the PGA Tour. So if you take a look at these recent metrics, the ball striking has not been great, right? But like I said, last week at a similar test ball striking, right? Short par 70, a lot of mid to shorter irons that you're going to hit. He went out there and he gained in both off the tee and with his approach play. So if we're assuming that that's been fixed, right? Maybe he found something last week at a similar type of golf course. If that short game is as stellar as it normally is, first off, I like his chances to make the cut, which would be great at $6,800, but he's got a lot of top 25 equity. And you can see I took him at plus 850 for the top 10. I think that is very realistic for somebody like Eric Cole this week. So it's more so about the long-term pedigree. You're talking about the rookie of the year, for goodness sakes. But on top of that, a golf course that fits his game. Now, off the tee, he's not the most accurate or the longest player. That's his one deficiency, which I actually think that this golf course is a little bit more off the tee heavy than I'd like for Eric Cole. But it's also the price tag and the ownership that we're going to get, right? He'll probably be sub 5% this week because no one wants to use an out-of-form Eric Cole. He's also super cheap, right? $6,800. If he was in form, right, he'd be $9,000 in this kind of field. So you're just buying the dip on Eric Cole, right? He's probably gone to rock bottom at this stage. I can't see him getting any cheaper, even any really lower owned, right, than what he's going to be out here for this golf tournament. It's a course that fits his game, right? If this guy was in form, like I said, he'd probably be like $9,000 out here in this field, and would also be a whole lot more chalky than what we're going to get for this kind of week. So, like I said, zero floor on this kind of play. He's got a really good chance of missing the cut. But if he continues that ball striking and then just snaps out of it, right, gets back to the player that we're used to when it comes to the short game, you're talking about a top 10 right there on that sort of player. So $6,800, I think, has enough upside for some of those large field contests. But on top of that, also a player that I think has upside from the betting market there with the top 10. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this week's betting and DFS preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me, and also comment down below who you've got winning this golf tournament. You can pick anyone but Rory. He'll be my pick for the win this week out here for the free month of the Patreon. But if you go out there, give me the winner in the comments. You'll go out there and win a free free month access to the Patreon page. So anyone not named Rory is up for grabs, and once a player is taken once, they can no longer be taken again. So make sure to go through the comments, make sure your player hasn't been taken, and then go ahead and give me your top option for this week. But looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun. We got a full field, right? 156 players, which is kind of nice to have, right? We haven't had one of those for quite some time. And also a pretty deep field, right? I know we don't have all the world's best playing, but enough of them right up there in this top 20 of the odds that I'm going to feel pretty decent about this week. And it's a really deep field too. A lot of that mid to mid top tier is going to be present up there in Canada. So part of that's the sponsors. RBC does a really good job of bringing in players. Second off, who doesn't want to go to that beautiful part of the Canada up there, right? It's not too far into Canada where you don't have to travel that far to get there. And from what I heard, I've never been up there before, that specific part of Canada. I hear it's just absolutely beautiful this time of year. So my parents were up there in Canada last weekend. Different part of Canada, said it was beautiful. So should be a good week out there for anyone that's there in person. So best of luck out there with all of your exposure this week. Again, give me your winner down in the comments. Smash that like button if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. We'll have a prop preview dropping tomorrow evening, giving you a little bit of a research-based video on how to attack the prop boards, both there in Underdog and Prize Picks, and of course our weekly live streams, which will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, going over all your questions, last second ownership, weather, all of that for you to get you guys ready for all of your exposure. So I'm looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun, like I said. Give me that winner, like I said, and I'll see you guys for the content throughout the rest of the week.